We're going to be learning as a schus for Shalema Vilane Chaya Baserach. We're on Daf Memvav Amid Beis toward the bottom, 8 lines from the bottom. Boira Mibachama. Hamishtachav Lekamas Chita. If someone bows down to standing wheat, the Bach changed it to Mahin Lemenachas. What's the din to use those chitim for menachas? We had the Shaila, this is Mechuber, obviously, and we had the Shaila on the top of the Amud of Boira Barchama, Lagabi, what's the din of Nevad, Har Nevad Legvaya? That means even though we know that a har that was worshipped doesn't become asur for a hedyot, it's the Torah, we learned the Torah is Maitzi, Haharim Eloheim Alaharim, but not the harim themselves. But that was the question was that maybe Legvaya, using it for kachim is more sensitive, that it's still going to be asur for that. So if you'll say that is asur, what happens if someone worshipped wheat and then they ground up that wheat into silas and want to use it for a mincha? So the Gemara explains what's the difference. What's the question? Yesh shina b'nevad or ain't shina b'nevad? If you'll say that the kamas chitim, the standing wheat was asur legvaya, now when you grind it up and you make it into flour, maybe that takes away the taint, and now it would be mutar legvaya. Amr zut Rebbeinu Rav Nachman Toshma. I'll bring you a Mishnah that l'chayra shows that this is a machlekes tanaim. Kol ha'asurin legabe mizbeach. Any animal that is asur legabe mizbeach, because they were nevad or they were nirva, one or the other, something that ased it. They say in mutaran, the child of that animal that was asur is mutter to be brought on the mizbeach. The Tani Allah, and we said on there, Rabbi Eliezer says it's asur. It's not going to be asur. So it's not going to be allowed to be used. The vlad is going to be asur to be used l'gabe mizbeach. The Gemara is assuming that this is talking about that the animal, the mother, became pregnant with this vlad, and then someone was nevad the animal, was reveya the mother, and with the fetus inside of it. So the fetus was also nevad or was nirva, and then she gave birth. The giving birth is a shinui in the animal. Beforehand it was inside, now it's outside. It was potential life, and now it becomes actual life. I'm not getting into the abortion questions, but it's assuming that we're going to see later on that the Gemara is going to say it's not really a difference. It's real, but at this point the Gemara is assuming that would be a full-fledged shinui. So that is exactly the question we had by the kamas chitin. While it was in the mother, it was asur. Now, so it's a machlekes whether it will be the machlekes tanaim of whether when she gives birth is that a shinui and therefore it could be used in it. So Rav Nachman said b'shem Rabba bar Avua that's not the case. It's not talking about a case where the mother first became pregnant and then gave birth, and then was nevad. But it's the other way around. It's talking about where it was first nirvu or nevad, whichever the case may be, whatever the isser happened to the mother first, and then she became pregnant. So the animal on the inside, the fetus was never nevad. Aval ivru b'sayv nirvu divrei kol asur, and everyone would agree it's asur. So the Gemara says that it would reflect from the way that. So we wouldn't have a raya from this mission. It's not talking about the case, even though the Manda Amar over here, the Amira, who says it's talking about machlekes nirvu b'sayv ivru, assumes that ivru b'sayv nirvu would be asur, but we don't have a raya necessarily that that's what the Mishnah is talking about. So this is like ivru b'sayv nirvu. So it's not the case that brisa was talking about. Where is this? Is Hey Tmura? I think it's a Mishnah. Yeah. Ikad Amri. Some have a slightly different version of this, where the response, the immediately they had said that this was what Rav Nachman Amar Rabbi Bavua said right away when we said the Mishnah. We quoted this explanation of the Mishnah immediately. And so he wanted to say that this should be a raya, like we're explaining the Mishnah over there. We're saying over there that if it's nirvu, ulusayf nirvu, divrei akal aser, because the shinoi, Ivrul said nirvu, we're not going to regard the giving birth as a shinoi. So we want to say over here also it should be aser, because we're going to disregard the shinoi. So on that, so in this version we say hachi hashta. It's not a raya. Hasami kara behema v'hashta behema. Over there, when the animal gave birth, that's not a real shinoi. It was a behema before, and it's a behema afterwards, whether it's in the mother or not. There's just a wall, a door in front of it, keeping it from coming out. But the door opens. It's the same animal inside or outside. So it was never a real shinoi. But something that changes from wheat into flour is two different things. It's changed its character. So maybe that's a shinui that would change it, that it would no longer have the taint of nevad to be aser, to be brought to legvaya, to be brought as a carbon. Someone who bows down to a decal, to a palm tree, can use the lulavim that come up from the palm tree, can use them for the mitzvah sukkah. So I think Rashi explains. Does Rashi explain it? Lavai ma'olam mitzvah imtim salaim is a Rashi yesh never b'uchudze it's a gavaya hachal in your mitzvah lulav mai. We're going in the tzad. We had the question legabe legavaya. That's again Rabbi Bachama's question. If you worship a mountain, which is mechuber, a palm tree is also mechuber, lehedjed it's mutter, and we questioned whether legvaya it's aser. So Rashi says this question is going on the tzad that legvaya it's aser, but legvaya, something being brought as a carbon, is more sensitive. It's more sensitive to something being nevad than something being brought used as a mitzvah. A mitzvah is a general mitzvah. It's not being brought as a carbon. So do we say that a lulav, something that was nevad, even though it's mutter lahedjed and it's asa legvaya, which way will using it lemitzvah go? Will it be more similar to legvaya? Will it be more similar to lahedjed? If it would, the tree was planted at the beginning for that, that would not be a question. I feel lahedjed nami asa, right? The tree that was planted for Avoda Zara, that's an ashera, and it's certainly going to be asa. Kiti bayalach be'ilan shenatul b'sayf avdu. A Elon that was first planted and then he was later of it. According to Rabbi Yehuda, that's also considered tfisas yidei adam. If it was nevad after it was planted by if it was planted by a person, didn't just grow on its own, but it was planted by a person, and then later it was nevad. So we said in the earlier Gemara that it's considered tfisas yidei adam, and therefore it's going to be awesome. So this would also certainly be awesome, even lahedjit. According to the Rabbanan, that would say it's mutter lahedjit in your mitzvah mai. What is the din? Like I'll be using it for a mitzvah to use it for on sukkahs for your mitzvah lulav. Mi moyes klapi gavaya ayiloi. Is it considered that it's moyes? The Rebbeinu Shalom doesn't want such a thing. That it's just like legvaya, we wouldn't use it as a carbon. We also can't use it for a mitzvah. The Rebbeinu Shalom is not interested in your kabbanis or your mitzvahs that are using something that was associated with Avodah Zarah. Ki Aser Rav Dimi Amar. Rav Dimi said that this question was different than the way it was originally, the way we just said it is. We're talking about ba'ashera shebitla kami ba'aleh. We're talking about an ashera, a tree that was worshipped by goyim, and then it was bottled. As we know, a goy can be mavatal his avodah zara, and it was bottled. So the question is, yesh dicha etzel mitzvah, say aim dicha etzel mitzvah. Do we say that there's a din that since it was at one point while this lulav was worshipped by the guy, it wasn't Asherah, even though there's a din that a guy can be mevatel what he worshipped, and it becomes mutter bahana, it's not considered a nevad, it's not considered also for a lahedya to be used. Does that bittul make it also capable of being used for a mitzvah? Do we say that once it was pushed away, that it couldn't be used for a mitzvah, it can never be used for a mitzvah again? Which we know there's in Lagabi Kodshim, there is such a concept. That yesh dicho yetzem mizbeach. If something became also to be brought on the mizbeach, it can no longer be redeemed and changed. It's lost its capability. Do we say the same thing Lagabi mitzvahs or not? Says Dr. Mara Tifshalei miditnan. I'll try to bring you a raya on this question. Kisov in his gal. There's a din that if someone shechts a chaya, like a deer, there's a special mitzvah of kisei hadam, that when you shecht a cow, it's not necessary to do this, but when you shecht a chaya, a wild animal, there's a mitzvah to cover over its blood. So if you covered over the blood of a deer after you shechted it, v'niskala, and it became uncovered, potam elichsis. You were yaitz the mitzvah already, and you could eat the deer. There's no mitzvah to go cover the blood again. You just did the mitzvah is to cover it, not to keep it covered for eternity. You don't have to put it into one of those nuclear waste repositories, so it should never get uncovered. Kiso haruach. What if the dam spritzed on you shechted the animal, and the dam fell on the ground, and the wind came and blew over dirt on top of it. So you didn't cover it with your hands, but it was done by the wind. Chayiv lichsis. You're mechayiv to be mechaset. What does that mean? That which we say chayiv lichsis only means if it was covered by the wind and then uncovered, because it's a continuation of the first din of the Mishnah. The first din we had said was that if it's covered and it gets uncovered, it's okay. But we're saying that's only when you covered it yourself. But if it was covered by the wind, then if it becomes uncovered, you are mechuyev to recover. As long as it's covered, you have no chiyuv to be mechaset. The Gemara asks, how could it be that we say that he's yaitz the mitzvah when the wind, he's not yaitz the mitzvah, the wind, there's no mitzvah for him to do kisei adam when it was covered by the wind. So the mitzvah went away. So if that's the case, when it gets nisgala later, since the mitzvah was nitcha, it should remain nitcha. So we see from the fact that you have to recover it again, even though there was no mitzvah earlier when the dam was covered on its own. You see that there's no such thing that because the mitzvah was pushed away, it's permanently pushed away. So the Gemara says, let's apply that to our question over here as well. That if you when you have a avodah zara, when you have a asherah that was bottle, then so do we say that since it wasn't able to be, that there was a lulav on it, and that lulav couldn't be used at that time for a mitzvah, is it permanently bottled from the mitzvah? So we'll say the same thing, ein dicha yetzel mitzvahs, even though it was originally not able to be used for the mitzvah, later on it becomes capable.
It's totally different things. The case with the Asherah, it's Mias. This is just the fact whether it's covered or not. There's no Mias here.
Well, I mean, we're not talking about we're not talking about the Moyes question over here. I think when something is bottle, I hear what you're saying. You're saying, why don't we say that svara of Mois? Well, but l'chayr the Gemara in this is a different iteration of the Gemara, right? We're saying a different shaila, and the Gemara is not casting it. The Gemara is not defining it. It depends on Mois or not. We're saying it's because of dichus. It could be this Gemara doesn't hold. This sheet of the Gemara doesn't hold of the svara of Mois at all. We're going to say a slightly similar type of svara, which will agree with you that because we wouldn't say it lechumra. Lechumra we should be machmer and not use it as a lulav. But this Gemara wasn't going with mois,
Mhm.
right? Because that was in the earlier iteration of what the question was. Now we're saying whether Asherah was bottle. If there was an Asherah, it was definitely an Asherah and then became bottle, whether it's asa forever. Before, what were we talking about?
When was it planted for originally not for the use of Avoda Zara, and then it was nevad, or was it originally planted for Avoda
אבל ליבה דרבנן לעניין מצווה מאי כי mois klapi gavaya oilai. So that was a question. Is it just mois because it was, even though it was, that's a different question. That was where it was an Asherah. No, say it wasn't an Asherah. It was a tree that couldn't become nevad, lahedjit. Does it still have a taint of mois? Is it mois ligvaya? Over here we're talking about something that was definitely nevad, but it was bottle, and there is such a din of bittel. So mois is a concept. If something was mutter lahedjit, it wasn't considered never. This is something that was considered never, but it was bottle. So we don't know that there is such a din of mois on that.
Mhm.
Sagt the Gemara. Sagt the Gemara, Rav Papa gufa yibaylu. Gemara says no. The question was about this din of Rav Papa. Rav Papa said zois emeres ein dichei etzel mitzvahs. That was his question. Mipship pshita leila Rav Papa de ein dichei etzel mitzvahs. Loishna kula v'loishna l'chumra. Is it like we said that Rav Papa says there's no dichei etzel mitzvahs? So therefore, it would apply even in our case to say that the lulav would be roy for a mitzvah. Maybe Rav Papa was saying ein dichei etzel mitzvahs because he wasn't sure what the din was. He was saying we have to consider that maybe there's no dichei by mitzvahs. So therefore he said, Lagabi kisi adam, since there's no dichei etzel mitzvahs, so therefore you have to be mechaser again, because maybe there's no dichei etzel mitzvahs. But Lagabi Arden, to say that the lulav should be kosher, lulav should be able to be used mitzvah, l'chumra, he's only saying misafik we have to be chayshish that ein dichei etzel mitzvah. To say to kosher the lulav that was nevad, that we can't do. Teku. Boy Rav Papa. Hamishtacha v'lebehema, someone who bows down to a behema. Samra mahu l'tchelis. What's the din legabi using its wool for tchelis? So what does this mean l'tchelis? Tchelis demai. So first of all, let's see if Rashi says. Rashi doesn't say over here. So what are you using the tchelis for? Tchelis demai. Eat tchelis l'kehanim. If you're talking about that some of the big day kahuna needed tchelis, hainu bayid Rami bar Chama. This is the question of Rami bar Chama. This Samra is part of an animal. A behemo, like we said, cannot become nevad. Right? We had our complicated Rashi that proves it from the fact that the Torah asks it for being, if it's nevad, it must be that it's mutter lehedjit, because otherwise it would be also it's mashke Yisrael. So in any case, this tchelas, this samra, this wool on a behema is part of something. It's attached to something that can't be nevad. And now when you shear it off, you want to use it for tchelas l'gehanim. That's the question of Rabbi Bar Chama, of where something was originally where something was also was mutter lahedjit. Does it become also l'gvaya?
But it's never by a goy. That's the assumption?
No, it doesn't make a difference who's Ovid it. There's no, I don't think, why would there be a difference between whether a guy or a yid is Ovid? The
We said that
difference
because of
is
the
who owns it. If something is, I mean, in this, I don't think there's an afkamina whether it was never by a guy or a yid. We have differences. If something is owned by a guy, then it could become bottled from its isser of nevad. And if it's owned by a yid, something that was owned by a yid and was worshipped can never be owned by a yid and then worshipped by the yid. That is asal olam. There's no bittel on it. But I don't think this is over here. We're not talking about legabi who owns it or legabi being mevatel. Okay. So that's the same question as Rami Bar Chama, right? So we have this is the same thing that Rami Bar Chama had asked of whether it becomes also ligvaya when you are oived something that's not capable of becoming nevad, and even if it's not even if it's not roy, let's say it becomes asal gvaya, but then when you take it and before we were talking about using it the avonim for mizbeach, so now it's changing. When you're using it, does changing it also? Does that change it? Is that mishanet that makes it that you can use it? Like we said, legabi the mincha, when you use the chita for the mincha and you ground it up. V'it chelis l'tzitzis. And if you want to use the chelis for tzitzis, right, that's the more common thing that we would think chelis is for. Hainu b'ayad Reish Lakish. That's the question of Reish Lakish l'gabi a mitzvah, whether it can be used for a mitzvah. You're right that these are really questions that we've already covered. Because of the tzamra l'tchelis was really not a new question. That was questions that we've already covered. But there's another question that was included there that he wanted to ask. Samra ma'u l'tchelis. First he asked, what's the din of using wool for tchelis? Karne ma'u l'chatzaris. Then what about using the horns for trumpets that they use in the Beis Hamikdash? Shukah ma'u l'chalilin. What's the din to use the femur? They would make flutes out of it. B'nei me'el ma'u l'pa'aris. What's the din to use guts? They used to use guts for strings. What's the din to use that for the strings of the instruments? According to the Manda Amr, that says the shira was part of the avodah of the Beis Hamikdash. So the question was, what was considered the shira? Was the shira the singing, or was the shira also not just the singing, but also the accompanying instruments? So if you're going to say it's also the accompanying instruments, so these things are being used now to make the instruments that are going to be used for the avodah, certainly it's going to be aser, according to the Manda Amar, who says that it's aser l'gvaya when you're never something that can't become aser. According to the Manda Amar, it says that ikashir is repeh, besusi kala bi'almahu, and the instruments are just to make it nicer, to enhance the singing. Umaysinan, do we say that therefore you could ring it? Or do we say even so? Again, we have all these different graduations of how close you are, of how disagreeable this is to the Rebbeinu Shalom. To use it for an actual carbon is the most disagreeable. Then you have the things that are hachsherim, and now you have something that's like 2 steps removed. It's a basis for some of the Rishonim say that singing itself is almost like an avodah, but this is just to help along that avodah. The question is that also going to be aser if it was nevad in a way that it doesn't become aser itself? Take Boy Rabba. Someone who bows down to a spring. What's the din to use the water of that spring for nesachim, for pouring out on the mizbeach? That's for the avodah where you on nisach hamayim on sukkahs. My kami boile. Ilay melibabua kasagid. If you'll ideal melamaya kasagid. If you'll say the question is, when a person is worshiping water, does it just mean he's worshiping his own reflection? He's looking at the reflection, and that's what he's worshiping. He's not actually worshiping the water. Or is he intending to worship the water itself? So the question is, was he worshiping the water at all? So in that case, then let's just ask about generally when someone uses water as a where he has water that he's worshiping, whether he could use it lahedjit, right? If it's not in the spring, which is part of mechubal karka, if he just has water that's talish from the karka, let's ask whether that's mutar lahedjit or not. If he's considered to have worshipped it, then it's like anything that he's oived, like an idol, and it should be awesome. But if you say he's just worshiping the reflection in it, so then it would be mutar. So the Gemara says no. His intention is not to worship himself, the reflection in the water. Is he only worshiping the water that's in front of him now? But when he's looking at a body of water, the water keeps moving around. He can't go to the edge of the Pacific Ocean and worship the whole Pacific Ocean. It's the water moves around, so that water is gone. Or he's worshiping the water in general. If there's a spring, he's worshiping that body of water. So tomorrow, Mitzri, what does it make a difference? So let's say he goes to the Pacific Ocean. He says, I'm worshiping the Pacific Ocean. You can't worship water, public waters. It's obviously a major problem. You accuse the Jews of poisoning the waters, and the Goyim could just go worship our waters, and then we'll all get very thirsty. We're talking about where the person owns it's not public water. We're talking about this guy or this yid has a spring on his own property, and he's worshiping that. And that's our question, whether the question is whether it's water that's moving. Do we say that he's worshiping the whole body of water, or is he just worshiping the water that's in front of him at that point? Okay, I think we have to do at least a little bit more. We can't just do an amud when we're so far behind. So we'll do, if you don't mind, another 5 minutes. Zok the Mishnah. Someone whose house was next to a house that wasn't the whole house was like an edifice. It was built as a statue that Goyim worship. So they shared a common wall where they both used that same wall, and it was owned by both of them together. V'nafal, and that wall, that shared wall fell down. Also live nicer. It's also to build it back up, because they'll be building up for the Avoda Zara. Kesad Yasa, what should he do? He goes into 4 amas into his own property, and then he could build. So the Rishonim explain that if he can't build it after it falls down, why was he allowed to why was he allowed to use it in the first place? So we're talking about where he first built the house, and then later on they decided to start worshiping it, or he built the house and then later on they built Avoda Zara next to it, and he couldn't stop them. But in this case, when it fell down, he has to rebuild 4 amas away. But if it's a different case, it's like our types of shared, when you have attached houses, where there's 2 separate walls, or there's one wall. There was no way to really differentiate between them. There was, let's say, a 2 amma wall where one owned 1 amma and the other one owned an amma of the other part. Neither mechza al mechza. In that case, if it fell down, he doesn't have to go a full 4 amas into his property. He just has to go 3 amas because 1 amma was his anyway. It was never part of the Avoda Zara, so he doesn't have to go as far. The part of Avodas Kechavim doesn't have to go in Daled Amas. Avon of Eitz of Afroi, the leftover, the debris that's left after the wall falls down from this wall of Avodah Zara, the Avodah Zara house, Metam and Kesheretz. It has a din. It's Metam and Kesheretz. Shnema shaket teshaksenu. This is a asmachta. The Chacham Mugoiza that it has a din of Tumah, and the din Tumah is like that of a sheretz. Rabbi Kiva Ayme Kanida. He says like Anida Shnema Tizram Kamoi Dava. You should get rid of them. This is talking about the Yidden in Eretz Yisrael getting rid when they conquered Eretz Yisrael. They should get rid of the Avodah Zaras like Nida. Say Toimelei. Say get out. Ma Nida Metava Masa Avodah Kechavim Metava Masa. So he says it's Daima to a Nida which has a higher level of Tumah that it even is Metama something that it carries. Zak the Gemara. How could we say that when a person's wall that he shares with Avodah Zara falls down, he has to move back 4 amas? Everyone knows you give an easement to your neighbor, it becomes part of his property. So how can you move back 4 amas and then make more room for the Avodah Zara? You're helping them out. You make it into a Beis HaKisei. So that way it's not, the Avodah Zara is not happy that those 4 amas are not being built. So how could you go, you make a Beis HaKisei right next to the house? In the old days, they used to make the Beis HaKisei far away where no one was around. You need privacy. So you just use it at night. At night, they used to have a nearby Beis HaKisei, latrine. Gemara says that it's tznius requires that even though it's dark, you still shouldn't go use the facilities in the same place where you do near your house, in a place that would be visible by day. Even though we said that doesn't mean that you have to make the latrine far away from your house. It means you should do it in a manner that it's not so visible. Just like by day a person doesn't uncover himself, by night also when no one sees, he should also do a bit tznius. It still should be a little bit tznius. To make it directly behind your house, directly next to your house, is not tznius, even though it could be closer. It could be in a place that's closer to your house, but it shouldn't be right there where it's a rabbin. So either, so it means when it says he makes it into a latrine, to a bathroom, it means using it for children who don't have a problem with tznius, or he covers it with thorns and bushes, so that it's you could use that use that to cover it so people can't see. I guess that's what it means. You can't make a wall around it. Then you cover it with the fence, and then no one could see it, and then you could use it. Okay. Yeah, shekayach.
The Gemara that said that the wall is tamei, like a sheretz. That means when the wall's still up. What are we talking about?
No, we're talking about the eitzim avonim. We're talking about what's left over. That's right. Avon of eitzav afroi. These are the actual pieces of the. We're talking about that building was a building of Avodah Zara itself.
So when the wall falls down, then it's
like an idol. It's like a broken idol.
All right. Otherwise, I was like, all right, thank you. I'd have a great day.
Have a good day.